Hello everyone, I'm Nitsa and welcome to another MTG Top 10. I post one of these every Friday. This week, we're looking at a keyword ability that used to be heavily supported but was abandoned by Wizards of the Coast a couple years ago, Landwalk. There are a variety of kinds of Landwalk, but they all check to see if your opponent has a certain type of land in play, and if they do, the creature with that type of Landwalk is completely unblockable. This is a mechanic that began way back in Alpha, the very first set of Magic, and the last set to feature it was Khans of Tarkir about 3 years ago. It was abandoned because Wizards felt that it was a mechanic that did not allow for enough interaction. It was a big part of the game for a while though, and hundreds of cards with various types of Landwalk have been printed. In this video, we're going to talk about the 10 that did the most at the highest level of competitive tournament play. Cards receive points on this list depending on how many Grand Prix or Pro Tour Top 8s they've received. The Pro Tour Top 8 worth twice as much as a Grand Prix Top 8. I also consider Legacy and Vintage Championship events as Pro Tour Top 8 so that those formats can be properly represented in the scores of the cards. Now let's get started. At number 10, I have Lumbering Satyr. This 4-mana 5/4, which was super efficient in its day, today it's not that exciting, grants all creatures Forest Walk. This is usually going to be more downside than upside for you, since obviously if you're casting the Satyr with a double green casting cost, you have some forests in play, and you just made it so that all of your opponent's creatures are unblockable. So why would anyone play this? Well, as I already mentioned, this was a highly efficient creature back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and this was a reasonable downside to people for a creature this size. It appeared in aggro decks that weren't really interested in blocking anyway, and felt like they could win any type of race that might emerge. It top-8'd Worlds in 2000 in a mono-green stompy aggro deck, and managed to top 8 at Pro Tour Chicago in 2000 in a red-green aggro deck. At number 9, we have Stoneybrook Banner, the first of several merfolk on this list, so be ready to see more of them. In terms of decks that actually make use of Landwalk on a regular basis, merfolk decks are probably the best ever, since they frequently run cards that make the opponent's lands into islands, and lots of ways to give creatures Island Walk or creatures that already have Island Walk, thus making these creatures unblockable. The Banneret reduces the cost of both merfolk and wizard spells, so it was obviously a nice tribal enabler for merfolk. It showed up in both block and standard versions of Merfolk, putting up 1 Pro Tour Top 8 and 3 Grand Prix Top 8s in those formats. However, while Merfolk have been a relevant deck at one point or another in basically every format, Stoneybrook Banner has not proved to be powerful enough to go along for the ride in non-rotating formats. At number 8, we have Inkwell Leviathan. This is a difficult card to deal with. Massive toughness, Shroud, Trample, and Island Walk all add up to the Leviathan being an excellent attacker. Problem is, it costs 9 mana to cast. Because of that, the Leviathan is seen play exclusively in Legacy Reanimator decks, where powerful spells can get this thing into play as early as turn 3. The Leviathan has even managed 1 Legacy Grand Prix Top 8 earlier this year, and Reanimator decks seem primed for a return to the top in Legacy, so it would not be a surprise to see its score improve in the near future. At number 7, we have Elvis Champion. The 3 old school lords from Alpha grant Landwalk of their respective color. Those lords are Zombie Master, Goblin King, and Lord of Atlantis. Elves didn't get the Lord treatment until a little bit later, but when they did, it followed that same template with Elvis Champion, who also provides +1/+1 for your entire team of elves, along with Forest Walk. Elvis Champion did not see play right away, though. Elves weren't really a thing when it was printed. It was printed in 2000 and didn't find its way into top 8s until 2008 at Pro Tour Berlin, which was an extended Pro Tour. There was a dominant elf-based deck at that Pro Tour that completely broke the card Glimpse of Nature. This deck could basically produce infinite mana, using all the different mana elves there are, and play every single elf in the deck without trying very hard, and either win with a massive swing with the elves, or by playing Predator Dragon, who had haste and could just end the game instantly after devouring all of your elves. That tournament got Glimpse of Nature banned though, and that is basically the entire history of that deck, all at one Pro Tour. It is also the entire history of Elvis Champion, almost at least, but since then it has also managed a Grand Prix Top 8 in a Tribal Elves deck in Modern. While there have been elf decks that have found success in Legacy, Elvis Champion has not been part of that success. If we see some new powerful stuff in a future set, you can bet Elvis Champion will find its way into modern decks, but until then, the champion is done getting points. At number 6, I have Volcanic Strength. Anytime I do research for these videos, I painstakingly go through all of Gather and check every card to see if it has seen play. 99% of the time, if a card looks to me like it hasn't seen play, I end up being right. But Volcanic Strength is the kind of card that makes it necessary for me to check every single card. I stopped playing Magic between about 2009 and 2014, and I don't have the first-hand knowledge of what was going on in the game at that time that I have for other periods within the game. And just looking at Volcanic Strength, it seemed like a throwaway aura that would even be a little bit risky to run in Limited, but obviously I was wrong. Red-based aggro decks were a big part of Standard in 2012-2013, with Gruul aggro being the place that Volcanic Strength saw the most play, but it also showed up in a mono-red aggro deck and a Rakdos aggro deck. For most of these decks, it was a sideboard card, a powerful one against anyone who was playing Mountains, including the aggro mirror, but in 2 of its Grand Prix top 8s, it was even in the main board, so it was clearly a good card with these aggressive creatures. At number 5, we have Master of the Pearl Trident. I promised you more merfolk, and here is another. This one is like Elvis Champion, and actually almost a functional reprint of Lord of Atlantis, which was originally printed in Alpha, who grants Island Walk and +1/+1 to all merfolk instead of just the ones you control. As I mentioned earlier, merfolk decks run cards that can turn the opponent's lands into islands, and thus this makes your entire merfolk army unblockable. Obviously, the Master has seen play only in merfolk decks, but this is included in both Legacy and Modern, with the Master showing up in fellow YouTuber Nikachu's merfolk build at a Modern Grand Prix top 8 earlier this year. Merfolk isn't the kind of deck basically guaranteed a top 8 at every Modern event like Death, Shadow, or Affinity, but it seems likely that the Master will continue to build its score, if only sporadically. At number 4, we have Arnim Jin, who, believe it or not, was a creature who was once a contender for best creature in Magic alongside Sarah Angel. The Jin is somewhat similar to Lumbering Satyr, who we also discussed. It doesn't have Forest Walk or grant Forest Walk to your own creatures. Instead, the creature's very efficient body, 4 mana for a 4/5, was offset by the fact that you had to give one of your opponent's creatures Forest Walk every turn. The good news was you got to choose which one, so oftentimes this isn't a big downside for such an efficient creature. Again, at the time. Again, today, not the most exciting card for us. Arnim Jin saw the most success, though, in a deck called Arnim-geddon. This deck's central strategy was to create a board state where Arnim Jin was the most dominant creature, which wasn't that hard at the time, wasn't much that cost 4 mana that was bigger than him, and then you would cast Armageddon. This made it so your opponent couldn't try to cast things to block the Jin, and it also meant that you no longer had forests in play, so giving your opponent's creatures Forest Walk didn't matter. Arnim Jin was found in some of the most successful decks of the early history of Magic, including Zoo, Green-White Aggro, and the aforementioned Armageddon. The most dominant showing of them all was probably at Pro Tour New York in 1996, where the Jin came away with 4 Pro Tour top 8s. Over the years, power creep has made Arnim Jin look a lot less impressive, but it is an important part of Magic's history. At number 3, we have Street Wraith. The Wraith is one of the few cards with cycling that doesn't require any mana. Instead, it asks for life. This effectively means that if you run 4 Street Wraiths, your deck is more consistent because it has become a 56-card deck. The Wraith long went unnoticed until Travis Wu unveiled the Living In deck and extended at Grand Prix Oakland in 2010. T-Wu's deck played a bunch of creatures with cycling, including the Wraith, and then sought to cascade into Living In to nuke the opponent's board and bring back all the creatures that you cycled. While Extended ceased to be a format shortly thereafter, Living In decks have survived the transition to Modern, where it is still a top-tier deck today, having picked up a Grand Prix top 8 as recently as February of this year. Recently, Street Wraith has also found another home in Modern, Death, Shadow, Zoo decks, where the Wraith helps improve the consistency of the deck while also shrinking your life total, making for a larger and larger Death Shadow. Street Wraith is likely to continue to move up on this list thanks to being a key card in 2 of the best decks in Modern right now. At number 2, we have Riverboa, another creature like Arnim Jin and the Satyr that really shows us how much power creep there has been with creatures. 2 mana for a 2/1 with a bunch of upside used to be very good. Being unblockable against blue decks and regenerating for a single green mana made this guy quite the force back in the day. The Riverboa was actually reprinted a few times after its initial printing in Visions, first in 6th edition and then in Zendikar. After its original printing, it saw a little play in Standard, picking up a Pro Tour top 8 at Worlds in 1997 in a mono-green aggro deck. Again, these are often called Stompy. After it was printed a couple of years later, though, it saw even more success, which included 3 Pro Tour top 8s at Worlds in 1999, again in Stompy decks, and 4 Pro Tour top 8s at Pro Tour Chicago in 2000, this time in Fires of Yavimaya decks, which were red-green aggro decks running this powerful enchantment. Worth noting that this card was actually in main boards as a full 4 of, despite sort of seeming like a sideboard card, because it was aggressive enough even without Island Walk. This was also true in Extended, where it picked up 2 Pro Tour top 8s and 5 Grand Prix top 8s, again in aggressive green decks. Despite being legal in Modern, Riverboa has been a victim of power creep, and there are far better 2-drops in green these days. And at number 1, a card that I've already referenced a few times, one of the original 3 Lords printed in Alpha, This lord has also been reprinted a ton of times, and if he has been legal, he has usually been a big part of what makes Merfolk decks so good, and that is Lord of Atlantis. Pumps all your creatures and gives them Island Walk. He is the best of the cycle of lords from Alpha because he only costs 2 mana instead of the 3 that the other lords require in Alpha, and most lords in general actually cost 3. This is one of the most efficient lords. We saw Merfolk of the Pearl Trident also does not, or Lord of the Pearl Trident also does only cost 2. The ability to give Island Walk is relevant, again, because Merfolk decks usually run ways to turn lands into islands. In Standard, he has managed 2 Worlds top 8s, 1 Pro Tour top 8, and 2 Grand Prix top 8s, all in Merfolk decks, as you might expect. In Modern, he has picked up 6 Grand Prix top 8s in Merfolk decks, again, most recently in the hands of Nikachu, YouTube's resident Merfolk expert. In Extended, he managed to pick up the first top 8 ever for any Merfolk deck at Pro Tour Rome way back in 1998, as well as a top 8 at Pro Tour Amsterdam, alongside a bunch of other Merfolk. Well, that does it for this list. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button. If you think they should bring back Landwalk or want to tell me your favorite Landwalker, let me know in the comments below. If you want to make sure you catch more MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. My Top 10s are sponsored by 5colorcombo.com, a great website for all things Magic. You can use my discount code NITZAHONE5 in their store for a 5% discount. Thanks for watching.